Hello class, we're in chapter number 1. Today we are in page number 4 in our health book. So yesterday we did learn about our blood and how our blood has different parts, such as the white blood cells, the red blood cells. We did learn about the platelets and the antibodies. Today what we're going to learn is we're going to learn about the most important part of our body, which is known as our heart. First off, we do have to know that our heart has a different name. Our heart can be also known as our cardiac muscle, which is located between your lungs. That means whenever I ask you on a test or a quiz about what is another name for heart, you're going to write cardiac muscle. The cardiac muscle, which is also known as our heart, is located between your lungs. But there's one way that we can actually tell the size of our heart. Some of you have already heard about it, but it's about the size of your fist. So your heart is about the size of your fist. So go ahead and show your fist, and that's going to be about the size of your heart. But the difference is there is a difference in weight between a child's heart and an adult's heart. A child's heart will weigh only about 1/4 of a pound. That's your heart. That's going to be the weight of your heart. But an adult heart will weigh about 1/2 of a pound. So in math, we did learn about fractions. As you can see, 1/4 and 1/2 is not that different. But whenever we look at our different parts of our body, 1/4 and 1/2 is going to be a huge difference in weight because we cannot have a child's heart to an adult body, or we cannot have an adult heart in a child's body. So it's very, very important about the difference in the weight of a child's heart and an adult's heart. Moving on. Our heart will contract around 90 times a minute. That means every second our heart will contract more than once. Sometimes it will contract 2 times. Sometimes our heart will contract 3 times. But one thing that we do have to be thankful of our heart is that our heart is actually an involuntary muscle. That means you don't need to remember to tell it to contract. Just imagine your heart actually being a voluntary muscle. Just imagine. That means every second you should be thinking of what? Contract, 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 contract. And sometimes you have to think it more than once every second. If our heart was a voluntary muscle, we have to be thankful that God created our heart, our cardiac muscle, to be an involuntary muscle, so we don't need to remember to tell it to contract. Moving on, learning more about our heart. Our heart is really two pumps placed side by side that work at the same time. That means our heart is not just one heart, but it's actually two pumps actually placed side by side. So we will have the right side of our heart and the left side of our heart. But in those two parts, again, it will be divided into two other parts. So each pump has two chambers. We have the atrium, which is the upper chamber. The atrium will receive blood from the veins, and then we have the ventricle, the lower chamber. It will pump blood to the arteries. So let's go and look at our heart right here in our picture. As you can see, our heart is divided into two different parts. We have the right part of our heart, and then we have the left part of our heart. In those parts of our heart, it is divided into two different parts again. We have the atrium, and then we have the ventricle. The atrium, which is the upper part, and the ventricle, which is the lower part. An easy way to remember the ventricle being the lower part, if you look at the lower part, this little part of our heart looks like a V. That will help you remember that that part is known as the ventricle. See this right ventricle? It has like a V. If you look at the left ventricle, it has a V as well. Moving on, the upper and the lower chambers will contract and relax at different times. It's because they have different jobs. When the atrium will contract, our ventricle will relax, and then when the atrium will relax, our ventricle will relax. Our ventricle will contract is because they have different jobs and they are working at different times. So moving on, let's go and learn about why though. Why does that actually happen? So there is a cycle as blood goes through our heart and goes back around our body. So we did learn that our heart will pump that blood, transporting what? Oxygen around our entire body. So the first thing is that our blood will enter the atria and the ventricles. So one thing is when blood comes back to our heart, our red blood cells will have no oxygen. The reason why our red blood cells will lack oxygen is because we already gave that all that oxygen to our body. That means that red blood cells, they need to refuel what? They need to refuel oxygen. So the red blood cells are going to come right here and right here. And the first thing, they're going to fill in the atrium right here. So blood enters the atria, also known as the atrium, and the ventricles. Moving on, once the ventricles are full, the atria will contract, filling the ventricles the rest of the way. So when blood is filled up right here, what will happen to the blood? The blood has to go down right here to the ventricle. How will that happen? After the atria contracts, valves will open and most of the blood flows down to the ventricles. So the valve is right here. What are valves? Valves are little door-like flaps. So this door will allow what? Blood to go from the atrium to the ventricle. After it goes to the ventricle, as you can see, there is another door right here. The blood will go from this ventricle to the pulmonary valve, to the arteries. Then the valves close to prevent blood from returning to the atria. And the last step is immediately the ventricles will contract, forcing blood out into the arteries and to your blood. In the beginning though, I did tell you that our heart is located where? In between our lungs. Let me go and show you this step though. So as I told you, blood will come with very few oxygen. It has to refill oxygen. So our blood will come right here, fill in the atrium, the right atrium. The doors will open, then fill in the right ventricle. After it fills the right ventricle, our blood will go to the pulmonary valve. And after pulmonary valve, right here, blood is going to go to our lungs. Our lungs are right here. When it goes to our lungs, our blood will refill oxygen and go back to the atrium. This is going to be our left atrium. When our blood arrives to our left atrium, that means our red blood cells have what? Oxygen. They already refilled that oxygen, so they're going to go back to the same exact step. When blood fills up right here, it goes to the left ventricle, and then it goes to the valve, and then it will transport all the blood. An easy way to remember is that the blue part of our heart is going to be when blood has no oxygen or very few oxygen. The red part of our heart is when our red blood cells have oxygen. So they already refilled that oxygen. An easy way to know the different cycles, the different step, is actually reading page number 6. If you turn your book to page number 6, let's go and look at the work of the pumps. You will see a bold title, the work of the pumps. I want you to read that certain paragraph. That paragraph will tell you the same exact steps that I just explained, and it's going to clear your understanding of how this cycle of our blood works. For today's classwork, what you're going to do, you're going to read page number 4, not page number 4, page number 5, all the way to page number 6. And after you have read page number 6, you're going to do a quick checkup in page number 6. Goodbye.